Okay, yeah, I think that was fine. You have your input. Okay, so Secretary French, thank you for coming this afternoon. We're here to talk about the school facilities inventory update. So I know that Senator Perchlik is interested in this, so we waited for you.
Good,
There you go. Okay.
Oh, good afternoon. I'm Dan French, Secretary of Education. I'm joined by Jill Briggs Campbell from the agency, who manages our federal funds and under the COVID relief and so forth. And school facilities has been a centerpiece of that work. So you have a slide deck in front of you on facilities inventory, a sort of summary report. I'll just set the context for a little of this a little bit. To refresh your memories a bit, pre-COVID, we've had a policy interest in working on school facilities issues, somewhat to a certain extent prompted by several safety issues, whether it be lead in drinking water, PCBs, and so forth. But then the larger issue of school construction and school construction moratorium aid, or a moratorium on school construction aid that goes back to about 2007. And we were pulling all those things together when COVID hit. And then coincidentally, we had the opportunity to leverage federal dollars to make some immediate progress on issues inside of schools, particularly as it pertains to indoor air quality. So we put all those elements together essentially last year, and the legislature passed Act 72. And Act 72 of 2021 had several elements to it, one of which was this facilities inventory. And if I lay these out sort of on an order of operations basis, like what do we do first? Even though the law didn't really lay it out that way, it has several different competing policies. I would argue this was the first one. Let's get the facilities inventory done. At the time last year, you might remember part of the rationale for doing that was to have some information in anticipation of what might be a major federal investment in infrastructure. That hasn't yet materialized, but we're still, to a certain extent, we're running blind at the state level as to the condition and inventory of our school facilities. So this piece, the inventory, was really designed to be a quick sort of snapshot of giving us some baseline information and literally enabling us to move from shoe boxes and index cards to a modern set of data that's now in a database that we can utilize. So the inventory wasn't supposed to be a complete sort of analysis of what's going on in schools. It was provide some baseline information on the age of facilities and so forth. Dates on recent construction projects. Good afternoon, Senator Luzzi. Good to see you. To fill a gap essentially in our knowledge set, and what we did with the inventory is we hired a firm, Bureau Veritas, a national, if not international consulting firm, to perform the inventory. They created a survey. The survey was sent out to essentially the facilities managers in each district, and we asked for them their perceptions of the state of their critical systems inside their buildings. And then the vendor intersected that with a database essentially of the lifespan of known construction materials, like the average age of windows and so forth. And from there, the intersection of the perceptions of facilities managers along with this database, we were able to determine a facilities index, if you will, and we get into depletion rates and all that. But essentially, this is baseline information. The next step in Act 72 is to do a more detailed facilities assessment. We're in the process of launching that RFP now. Different from the facilities inventory, the assessment will actually send contractor engineers out to each building in the state and do a sort of a consistent analysis, more in-depth analysis of each school facility. But now we have sort of the baseline information that allows us to start to develop some policy direction, which will be probably a topic for next legislative session. So just to summarize on the facilities inventory piece and allow you some time for questioning, again, I have to leave promptly at 3:30. The inventory is not designed to provide a comprehensive understanding of school facilities. It basically is filling a gap in baseline information that we otherwise did not have. The product from this is a summary report, which we've sent to the General Assembly. So hopefully you have access to that. It's about 5 or 6 pages long. The other part of the product is this detailed database that we're now in the process of publishing to the web So every Vermonter who's interested will have the ability to go into that website and work interactively with the data, sort schools by different conditions and so forth. So I think that'll be useful. The initial policy implications that I walk away from are not new ones, because this is kind of what was in my message, I think, last year on this, is that there's likely going to be a need to do some prioritization ultimately to address the needs of school facilities. Previously, our policy, particularly on school construction, was a flat across the board 30% reimbursement for a qualifying school construction project. That's probably not the path we're going to go down at some point. But at any rate, why don't I pause there? I'd be happy to answer any specific questions about this facilities inventory exercise, and also in the broader context of school facilities relative to Act 72.
So it shouldn't have.
Secretary French, not necessarily a question, but just applause. This is exactly what I was hoping for last year when we were trying to get our hands around the conditions of our schools and how to prioritize. And as we look at, I'm hoping part of this is beyond just systems, and also might be helpful as we start to tackle the a similar method, at least, for the concerns regarding PFCBs, the acronym that is there. So this is remarkable work, and I'm really glad we have this on hand, and I think it'll be very informative as we prioritize going forward.
Yeah, and it was interesting. We were having this conversation inside the context of our own deliberations when we reached out to this national firm. They do this type of thing all over the place. So this is not an unusual ask, I would say. But literally, I mean, for us, it's going from shoe boxes and index cards to a modern data set. So that can't be underestimated how important that is. And again, I think once we put the tool on the website, you'll see the true value of this.
Andy?
Yeah, so I don't know if you were going to continue with some of this slide deck, or you just stop for questions part way.
I can do what you like. I was just in the interest of time. I wasn't sure if you had a lengthy list of questions or.
I was just wondering, so you're going to do an RFP this spring. I see on the slide deck you requested an extension. I didn't hear you say that, but maybe I just missed it. So I wondered if you just wanted to give us the timeline going forward.
Sure.
We're getting the assessment.
And this gets into Act 72 a bit. You know, we, in order of operations, we're scheduled to complete this, I think, in January, and we asked the vendor to extend that a bit because we didn't have as many school districts as respond. I think we had over half at that point, but we wanted, as if not all of them, close to it. And by pushing this back to March, we were able to get almost everyone in, which was, I think, going to be exceedingly useful. But we are, you know, just due to the volume of work we're managing relative to Act 72, but also with our other COVID related activities, we are asking for an extension of the assessment, which is, I think, originally the law was October 1, 2022. We'd like to push that back out to 2023. The assessment is far more comprehensive. It's going to require visits to each school, and we're prepared to do that RFP now, but it'll take us some time to secure a vendor and to get them situated in the context of PCB remediation, everything else that's going on. I think year extension is more realistic and would serve the, honestly, we would not be able to complete the assessment between now and October.
And are you expecting the assessment, you know, it'll be for individual buildings? Is it also expected to have a cost, or just a status of the buildings?
I believe we can get the costs. We can get the costs with this product as well. And this product, once we put the database up, does include individual buildings. So all that detail is in there. It's not easy to summarize in a executive report, because part of the ask here for the contractor was to produce that database. You might remember that debate inside the General Assembly. So we have that. It's just, it needs to be put up on an interactive basis, because I think that's where the power of it will come from, is people want to, well, if I have a school with a roof like this, I want to look at other schools that might have similar things, and it's going to be exceedingly useful in that regard. But the assessment will, and we can get into costs very easily with this once we come up with, in this case, a standard survey. You know, and the vendor remarked to me at one point, you know, if money was in question right now, that might have skewed the results a bit, meaning people might have reported their condition as being worse than it was if they knew the money was on the table now, but it's not. So they basically made the observation. They thought it was a fairly fair representation across the state. But we can certainly move to the financial implications as well. I think, you know, that's where the policy.
Sorry to interrupt. I just couldn't remember if Act 72 asked that the assessment have dollar numbers.
I don't think it did,
Okay.
but I'll have to go back and look. I think, that's where we get into the policy criteria. Because it's certainly one thing to add it all up. But it's another thing altogether to say which school would we invest in and which school we wouldn't, which areas are more of a priority than others, so to speak. And then, like most states, I think we're going to have to get into the issue of like the ability of a community to pay. Most states have a sort of a sliding scale, if you will, on the reimbursement or the investment.
And do you see a possible outcome of all this work having a school building standard? I know some other states have this where basically the state can red tag a building and say like, this isn't up to the standards, so you can't use this building till you fix it.
I think, that's precisely, I think, one of the policy implications. And we've surfaced the issue, and this actually is an issue that's in the weighting study conversation, about how do we know that if we make adjustments in the financial system, how do we know we're going to get the outputs that we need? And this gets into the issue, what I call school district quality standards, and facilities standards should be embedded in quality standards, would be my argument. We have some work in Act 72 already set out to revise the school construction standards that already exist in regulation. But I think what I hope would emerge from this legislative session is a direction to do some work on school district quality standards, under which we would look at facility standards as well. Because I think that's the piece that's been missing in the last 20 years or so. Once No Child Left Behind Act came on, we sort of got out of that business. We used to do public school approval, and we'd go around and look at the facilities and say, you need to fix that issue.
Okay. Good. No, I think this is like Senator Shindon said, and it's, I think, what we were looking for this first phase of this work, and hope we can get to the phase of actually fixing it pretty soon. But understand, I think we're making the smart choice of doing it thoughtfully and carefully.
Prioritization.
Yeah, and it's that prioritization piece that I think is the key, right? So we just keep going down this path of getting better and better data. It's gonna enable better policy making and asking those questions, because otherwise we're just anecdotally making observations, and it teases out the issues of maintenance versus construction. There is an obligation for school districts to maintain their schools. That's longstanding. What's been missing is the regulatory oversight to make sure that's happening. And it's an essential ingredient. That's central to my argument, is quality facilities is a central ingredient to quality outcomes in education.
Yeah, especially things like how much oxygen is in the air kids are breathing and things. But before you go, because I don't have much time, you have a slide on the PCB remediation, and I didn't know if you included that in there because we as a position, or you're just kind of telling us that don't think we're going to be using ARPA funds, or I wonder if you just comment on that slide.
Yeah, thank you for that prompt. This was a slide deck we put together for House Education, and one of their asks was to talk a little bit more about PCB funding. And we had been meeting inside of state government with DEC and other partners to talk about this issue. And and Jill was largely the person behind that. We took on the work of investigating the use of federal dollars. So this was sort of reporting back on the results of that investigation. And Jill did a fine job of, because some of this has to be checked in with the U.S. Department of Treasury. That's not necessarily a place we're as familiar. Usually we work with the U.S. Department of Education. So essentially we've confirmed federal dollars can be used for PCB remediation, and particularly the ARP funds. Of course, there are competing interests for those funds, and that's the other challenge. But we wanted to just answer that question definitively. Yes, they are can be used for that.
Okay, just a couple of questions. Secretary French, you mentioned that most all of the schools have been inventory. How many are left? Do you know, or maybe Mr. Briggs Campbell can? Six.
We have. I think it's the issue here is to draw a distinction, I think, between the public schools and the independent schools. I think where I'm more confident, and it's on, I think, slide number 3 or 2. We have surveyed 305 schools and 384 buildings. I think where that data set is strong is in the public schools. I think where we start getting into the independent schools, it gets a little hazier. But Jill, I don't know if you want to qualify that a little bit.
Yes, so we actually had a fairly extraordinary response. So the inventory was only for public schools, and all but 6 schools responded. So that's, really a remarkable effort on the part of the field, particularly during the height of Omicron, to complete that work. So, a better than we had hoped for response. We can say we've got a pretty comprehensive look at the public schools. I agree with Secretary French. We really don't have any of that same level of information for independent schools. The only places that we would be gathering that would be if they are applying for HVAC improvements through Efficiency Vermont. We would gain some data there. And then, of course, through the PCB testing program. But otherwise, we don't really have those access points for information.
And are those 6 schools that are you're still waiting for, are they spread out throughout the state?
There was one district that didn't respond, but I would need to check and see exactly who those were. We would anticipate getting them in the facilities assessment, though, so they will get swept up into a full inventory and assessment.
Senator Chandler.
I just reflect, and I wonder if you would contradict this, but I think partly from my meandering travels through the political arena, the reason why you had such a high response rate is that this is weighing heavy on many school districts' minds. The condition of our facilities are deferred, to say the least. And I think a lot of superintendents I speak to are very, very concerned about how they're going to pay for the needed improvements to these facilities.
Yeah, I would agree. Certainly, I think, the contractor's perspective, again, they detected a lot of enthusiasm for participating in this. And we had to delay it by a couple of months to get most of the folks under due to the demands on their time. And for the most part, these are like facilities managers that supervise multiple schools in a single district completing the survey. But there was a lot of interest in participating in it.
Mr. Secretary, I apologize. I've been down with our money committees for the past 40 minutes or so. During those conversations, of course, we talked about PCBs. That was probably the biggest topic. Teacher shortage, another big topic. And then finally, I would say school construction. And one of the questions they are wondering for this committee, or sort of charging this committee with, is what kind of dollars should be set aside to deal with some of the items that I'm sure you've all just been talking about. And I don't know if you have that kind of dollar amount, something that,
I would.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think the immediate, in terms of dollars, I think the PCB, putting something aside for PCB remediation would be prudent.
Yes, and I think they're going to do that, I believe. I don't want to misspeak, but I certainly agree that's a priority. But what about school construction funds?
I think
something else.
I think it would be premature to do that for a couple of reasons. One is, under Act 72, we're basically charged with rewriting the school construction standards, and the implications of the inventory and other work we'll do, no doubt, on the assessment leads to a change in policy. Even though we are charged with resurrecting the school construction standards, my argument would be that they're probably inappropriate at this point, that we need to reconsider school construction in the context of a Brigham perspective, an equity perspective, but also an education prioritization. And that's going to take some work. I think we have a vehicle to do that work in the school district quality standards language that's been included as part of the weighting study. So I think we have another year of policy design, essentially, while the assessment information comes back, meaning that we'll probably be looking at a different school construction approach than what was historically available. So I think we have another year at least. And then, I think it's not the time to do it either as a result of the changes contemplated in the weighting study. There's so much variability right now inside of school district funding, let alone the influx of federal dollars. We have staffing issues, as you mentioned. and the facilities work, just the recovery work that school districts are going to be engaged in. So this is a fairly, I won't characterize it as a volatile time, but it's volatile from a budgeting standpoint. There's a lot of new variables being introduced. So
Synergistic.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. I received a text message from a very knowledgeable individual tuning in remotely, and they asked the question to confirm. I just want to confirm that what you said is what I understand, that the inventory so far has been from facility staff, and that the next part of your status update is completing the inventory list. You're going to engage professional staff that really understand these things more. So that's the next stage, correct?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd characterize it as understanding more, but the assessment is fundamentally different. This is an inventory that took survey information from facilities information, basically their perception, and that was intersected with a database of known life of materials. So the older facilities they tend to show up as higher depleted values. The assessment process, which is next, is a contractor, an engineer, shall we say, that will look at each facility. So it's you'll have one central contractor looking at every single facility consistently, as opposed to relying on individual districts to report their information from their perspective. So there'll be much more stability in the quality of the information because it'll go in more detail, but it'll also be done consistently by the same vendor.
Quick follow-up, just I wish this person was actually sitting in my seat, but they just also offered that each year the delay is in fact exacerbating this problem. But I know we're doing what we can, and I think this is the right approach to Senator Perchik's earlier point.
Yeah.
So thank you for this good work.
Yeah, I apologize. I have to leave, but be happy to come back. And Jill, I think, has ability to stay on for a bit. So thank you very much for your interest in this topic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a superintendent for that.
Okay.
And I do have time. I'm happy to stay and answer any additional questions.
I don't know, any other questions? Andy?
So
You look.
I think we're okay.
Okay.
Yes, please.
what more could we do to help you with this effort?
If you have the ability to clone me, that would be fantastic.
Another
Uh,
FTE.
No, I think that providing that bit of space and time to be able to keep the elements of Act 72 moving is really critical. I agree with Secretary French that the policy implications of that need to happen in Section 2 of Act 72, which is where the construction standards and the capital outlay formula sort of need to logically follow from the more comprehensive assessment and allowing that to take shape. As I've spoken with Senator Perchik on several occasions, and he's aware of this as well, the complexity is being sort of compounded every day for the schools as they're trying to grapple with multiple funding streams. You know, there's this great opportunity of funds, particularly federal funds, that are almost never available for school construction, but the landscape is incredibly complex. Just for awareness, I was grabbing these numbers as we were discussing. For folks' awareness, we have over 130 projects being funded, school construction projects being funded with ESSER funds, ESSER 1, 2, and ARP ESSER. And of those, 21 are through the project approval phase, which means they've broken ground on the project. So our team at the agency and out in the field is handling dozens of sort of initial reviews every single week. So the schools are really, there's a real momentum that's happening. Also for awareness, the Efficiency Vermont, the ARP Indoor Air Quality Grant Program, which is we do in partnership with Efficiency Vermont, opened for applications in March, and the initial round of applications was over 150 different projects that they received. So, you know, they're prioritizing, and of course, my counterpart, Jody Lesko, who I partner with, is always happy to come in and speak with you all, but we work really closely with them. They're prioritizing projects based on the priorities set out by the legislature last session around schools with little or no mechanical ventilation. Those tend to be the projects that are the most expensive, right? Of, you know, as opposed to sort of tweaking or doing maintenance on a system that already is operating. And so I think that what we can anticipate is that the $18 million that were appropriated in ARPA SFRF funds for that program are going to be used up pretty quickly. Our partners at Efficiency Vermont, and we're in agreement, we think probably by September of this year, those funds will probably all be obligated for projects. So I think that really points to the need. And in addition, the majority of projects that we've been seeing for ESSER funds are also those kinds of indoor air quality projects, those HVAC projects. But we are also seeing a really broad range of construction and facilities projects coming through using ESSER funds. I would be happy, at a later time, if you all are interested, to see the kinds of things that are being used for that. But it's pretty extraordinary work that's being done with these funds.
I think that would be great for us to see at some point. Appreciate the offer.
Yeah.
Senator Chittenden pointed out how hungry the districts have been for this type of deferment, a lot of deferment.
Yeah, there's a lot of deferred maintenance projects. There's, again, indoor air quality is kind of number one, but also a need to take old buildings and transform them into 21st century learning spaces as part of, we really frame this as part of education recovery. So how can, for example, I'll just throw out a quick example and feel free to ask more questions, but I'm part of the team that reviews these, so I do see these projects. So for example, we have schools where they may have sort of additional support spaces that are needed for students with IEPs, and their old buildings really don't accommodate the kinds of approaches that we would want to see in working with students with disabilities. So transforming interior spaces to be able to provide better educational services to vulnerable student populations is one of those things that we've seen a lot of. And we've seen a lot of outdoor pavilions, outdoor classrooms. That's obviously a part of the prepare and prevent and respond to COVID. So we've seen a lot of those projects come through as well.
Thank you, Ms. Briggs Campbell. Unless I see any other pressing questions right now, I think we'll leave it there. It was terrific. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you all. Anytime.
Thank you very much, Daphne.